The Little Shepherd of Kingdom Come by John Fox Jr. Chapter 26. Brother Against Brother at Last. It was the first warm day of spring, and the sunshine was very soothing to Melissa as she sat on the old porch early in the afternoon. Perhaps it was a memory of childhood. Perhaps she was thinking of the happy days she and Chad had spent on the riverbank long ago. And perhaps it was that sudden thought that with the little they had to eat in the house, and that little the same 3 times a day, week in and week out, Mother Turner, who'd been ailing, would like to have some fish. Perhaps it was the primitive hunting instinct that on such a day sets a country boy's fingers itching for a squirrel rifle or a cane fishing pole. But she sprang from her seat, leaving old Jack to doze on the porch, and in half an hour was crouched down behind a boulder below the river bend, dropping a wiggling worm into a dark, still pool. As she sat there, contented and luckless, the sun grew so warm that she got drowsy and dozed. How long she did not know, but she awoke with a start and with a frightened sense that someone was near her, though she could hear no sound. But she lay still, her heart beating high, and so sure that her instinct was true that she was not even surprised when she heard a voice in the thicket above, a low voice, but one she knew perfectly well. "I tell you, he's a-comin' up river now, and he's a-goin' to stay with old Ham Blake ternight over the mountain, and he'll be a-comin' through Hurricane Gap about daylight tomorrow or next day shore. He's got a lot of men, but we can lay way 'em in the gap and get away all right." It was Tad Dillon speaking. Dawes Dillon, his brother, answered, "I don't want to kill anybody, but that damn Chad, Captain Chad Buford, he calls himself. Well, we can get him all right. I heard that they was a-looking for us and was a-going to ketch us if they could." "I wish I knowed that was so," said Dawes with an oath. "Nary a one of 'em would get away alive if I just knowed it was so. But we'll get old Captain Chad Buford shore's hell. You go tell the boys to guard the gap ternight. They mought come through afore day." And then the noise of their footsteps fainted out of hearing, and Melissa rose and sped back to the house. From behind a clump of bushes above where she had sat rose the gigantic figure of Rebel Jerry Dillon. He looked after the flying girl with a grim smile and then dropped his great bulk down on the bed of moss where he'd been listening to the plan of his enemies and kinsmen. Jerry had made many expeditions over from Virginia lately, and each time he'd gone back with a new notch on the murderous knife that he carried in his belt. He had but 2 personal enemies alive now, Dawes Dillon, who had tried to have him shot, and his own brother, Yankee Jake. This was the second time he had been over for Dawes, and after his first trip he had persuaded Dan to ask permission from General Morgan to take a company into Kentucky and destroy Dawes and his band, and Morgan had given him leave, for Federals and Confederates were chasing down these guerrillas right now, sometimes even joining forces to further help their common purpose. Jerry'd been slipping through the woods after Dawes, meaning to crawl close enough to kill him, and perhaps Tad Dillon too, if necessary. But after hearing their plan, he let them go, for a bigger chance might be at hand. If Chad Buford was in the mountains looking for Dawes, Yankee Jake was with him. If he killed Dawes now, Chad and his men would hear of his death and would go back, most likely, and that was the thought that checked his finger on the trigger of his pistol. Another thought now lifted him to his feet with surprising quickness and sent him on a run down the river where his horse was hitched in the bushes. He'd go over the mountain for Dan. He could lead Dan and his men to Hurricane Gap by daylight. Chad Buford could fight it out with Dawes, and his gang, and he and Dan would fight it out with the men who won, no matter whether Yankees or guerrillas. And a grim smile stayed on Rebel Jerry's face as he climbed. On the porch of the Turner cabin sat Melissa with her hands clenched and old Jack's head in her lap. There was no use worrying Mother Turner. She feared even to tell her, but what should she do? She might boldly cross the mountain now, for she was known to be a rebel, but the Dillons, knowing too how close Chad had once been to the Turners, might suspect and stop her. No, if she went at all, she must go after nightfall, but how would she get away from Mother Turner, and how could she make her way undetected through Hurricane Gap? The cliffs were so steep and close together in one place that she could hardly pass more than 40 feet from the road on either side, and she could not pass that close to pickets and not be heard. Her brain ached with planning, and she was so absorbed as night came on that several times old Mother Turner curiously asked what was ailing her and why she did not pay more heed to her work. And the girl answered her patiently and went on with her planning. Before dark, she knew what she would do. And after the old mother was asleep, she rose softly, slipped out the door without awakening even old Jack, and she went to the barn, where she got the sheep bell that old Beelzebub used to wear, and with the clapper caught in one hand to keep the bell from tinkling, she went swiftly down the road toward Hurricane Gap. Several times she had to dart into the bushes while men on horseback rode by her, and once she came near being caught by 3 men on foot, all hurrying at Dawes Dillon's order to the gap through which she must go. When the road turned from the river, she went slowly along the edge of it, so that if discovered, she could leap with one spring into the bushes. It was raining, a cold drizzle that began to chill her and set her to coughing, so that she was half afraid that she might disclose herself. At the mouth of the gap, she saw a fire on one side of the road and could hear talking, but she had no difficulty passing it on the other side. But on where the gap narrowed, there was the trouble. It must have been an hour before midnight when she tremblingly neared the narrow defile. The rain had ceased, and she'd crept around a boulder she could see by the light of the moon between 2 black clouds, 2 sentinels beyond. The crisis was at hand now. She slipped to one side of the road, climbed the cliff as high as she could, and crept about it. She was past one picket now, and in her eagerness, one foot slipped and she half fell. She almost held her breath and lay still. "I hear something up there in the brush," shouted the second picket. "Halt!" Melissa tinkled the sheep bell and pushed a bush to and fro as though a sheep or a cow might be rubbing itself, and the picket she had passed laughed aloud. "Going to shoot old..." "Going to shoot old Sally Perkins' cow, air you?" he said jeeringly. "Yes, I heard her," he added, lying, for being up all night the night before he had drowsed at his post. A moment later, Melissa moved on, making considerable noise and tinkling her bell constantly. She was near the top now, and when she peered out through the bushes, no one was in sight, and she leaped into the road and fled down the mountain. At the foot of the spur, another ringing cry smote the darkness in front of her. "Halt! Who goes there?" "Don't shoot," she cried weakly. "It's only me." "Advance, me," said the picket, astonished to hear a woman's voice. And then into the light of his fire stepped a shepherdess with a shepherd bell in her hand, with a beautiful, pale, distressed face, a wet, clinging dress, and masses of yellow hair surging out of the shawl over her head. The ill, startled picket dropped the butt of his musket to the ground and stared. "I want to see Chad, your captain," she said timidly. "All right," said the soldier courteously. "He's just below there, and I guess he's up. We're getting ready to start now. Come along." "Oh, no," she said hurriedly. "I can't go down there." It had just struck her that Chad must not see her, but the picket thought she naturally did not wish to face a lot of soldiers in her bedraggled and torn dress, and he said quickly, "All right, give me your message, and I'll take it to him." He smiled. "You can wait here and stand guard." Melissa told him hurriedly how she'd come over the mountain and what was going on over there, and the picket with a low whistle started down toward his camp without another word. Chad could not doubt the accuracy of the information. The picket had names and facts. "A girl, you say?" "Yes, sir," the soldier hesitated, "and a very pretty one, too. She came over the mountain alone and on foot through this darkness. She passed the pickets on the other side, pretending to be a sheep. She had a bell in her hand." Chad smiled. He knew that trick. "Where is she?" "She's standing guard for me." The picket turned at a gesture from Chad and led the way, but they found no Melissa. She'd heard Chad's voice and fled up the mountain. Before daybreak, she was descending the mountain on the other side, along the same way, tinkling her sheep bell and creeping past the pickets. It was raining again, and now her cold had grown worse. Several times she had to muffle her face into her shawl to keep her cough from betraying her. As she passed the ford below the Turner cabin, she heard the splash of many horses crossing the river, and she ran on, frightened and wondering. Before daybreak, she had slipped into her bed without arousing Mother Turner, and she did not get up that day, but lay ill abed. The splashing of those many horses was made by Captain Daniel Dean and his men, guided by rebel Jerry. High on the mountainside, they hid their horses in a ravine and crept toward the gap on foot, so that while Dawes with his gang waited for Chad, the rebels lay in the brush waiting for him. Dan was merry over the prospect. "We'll just let them fight it out," he said, "and then we'll dash in and gobble them both up." "That was a fine scheme of yours, Jerry." Rebel Jerry smiled. There was one thing he had not told his captain: who those rebels were. Purposely, he'd kept that fact hidden. He'd seen Dan purposely refrain from killing Chad Buford once, and he feared that Dan might think his brother Harry was among the Yankees. All this Rebel Jerry failed to understand, and he wanted nothing known now that might stay anybody's hand. Dawn broke and nothing happened. Not a shot rang out, and only the smoke of the guerrillas' fire showed in the peaceful mouth of the gap. Dan wanted to attack the guerrillas, but Jerry persuaded him to wait until he could learn how the land lay, and disappeared into the bushes. At noon he came back. "The Yankees have found out Dawes is there in the gap," he said, "and they are going to slip over before day tomorrow and surprise him. It don't make no difference to us which surprises which, does it?" So the rebels kept hid through the day in the bushes on the mountainside, and when Chad slipped through the gap next morning before day and took up the guerrillas' pickets, Dan had moved into the same gap from the other side and was lying in the bushes with his men near the guerrillas' fire waiting for the Yankees to make their attack. And he had not long to wait. At the first white streak of dawn overhead, a shout rang through the woods from the Yankees to the startled guerrillas. "Surrender!" A fusillade followed. Again, "Surrender!" And there was a short silence, broken by low curses from the guerrillas and a stern Yankee voice giving short, quick orders. The guerrillas had given up. Rebel Jerry moved restlessly at Dan's side, and Dan cautioned him. "Wait, let them have time to disarm the prisoners," he whispered. "Now," he added a little while later, "creep quietly, boys. Forward they went like snakes, creeping to the edge of the brush, whence they could see the sullen guerrillas grouped on one side of the fire, their arms stacked, while a tall figure in blue moved here and there and gave orders in a voice that all at once seemed strangely familiar to Dan. "Now, boys," he said half aloud, "give 'em a volley and charge." At his word there was a rattling fusillade, and then the rebels leaped from the bushes and dashed on the astonished Yankees and their prisoners. It was pistol to pistol at first, and then they closed to knife thrust and musket butt, hand to hand in a cloud of smoke. At the first fire from the rebels, Chad saw his prisoner Dawes Dillon leap for the stacked arms and disappear. A moment later, as he was emptying his pistol at his charging foes, he felt a bullet clip a lock of hair from the back of his head, and he turned to see Dawes on the farthest edge of the firelight, leveling his pistol for another shot. Before he ran, like lightning, he wheeled, and when his finger pulled the trigger, Dawes sank limply, his grinning, malignant face sickening as he fell. The tall fellow in blue snapped his pistol at Dan, and as Dan, whose pistol too was empty, sprang forward and closed with him, he heard a triumphant yell behind him, and Rebel Jerry's huge figure flashed past him. With the same glance, he saw among the Yankees another giant who looked like another Jerry, saw his face grow ghastly with fear when Jerry's yell rose, and then grow taut with ferocity as he tugged at his sheath to meet the murderous knife flashing toward him. The terrible Dillon twins were come together at last, and Dan shuddered, but he saw no more, for he was busy with the lithe Yankee in whose arms he was closed. As they struggled, Dan tried to get his knife, and the Yankee tugged for his second pistol, each clasping the other's wrist. Not a sound did they make, nor could either see the other's face, for Dan had his chin in his opponent's breast and was striving to bend him backwards. He had clutched the Yankee's right hand as it went back for his pistol, just as the Yankee had caught his right in front, feeling for his knife. The advantage would have been all Dan's, except that the Yankee suddenly loosed his wrist and gripped him tight about the body in an underhold so that Dan could not whirl him around. But he could twist that wrist, and twist it he did with both his hands and all his strength. Once the Yankee gave a smothered groan of pain, and Dan heard him grit his teeth to keep it back. The smoke had lifted now, and when they fell, it was in the light of the fire the Yankee had thrown him, with a knee trick that Harry used to try on him when they were boys. But something about the Yankee snapped as they fell, and he groaned aloud. Clutching him by the throat, Dan threw him over so he could get at his knife now. "Surrender," he said hoarsely. His answer was a convulsive struggle, and then the Yankee lay still. "Surrender," said Dan again, lifting his knife above the Yankee's breast, "or damn you, I'll—" The Yankee had turned his face weakly toward the fire, and Dan, with a cry of horror, threw his knife away and sprang to his feet. Straight away the Yankee's closed eyes opened, and he smiled faintly. "Why, Dan, is that you?" he asked. "I thought it would come," he added quietly, and then Harry Dean lapsed into unconsciousness. Thus, at its best, this was a fratricidal war, and it was being fought out that day at daybreak in one little hollow of the Kentucky mountains. And thus, at its worst, it was being fought out in another little hollow scarcely 20 yards away, where the giant twins, Rebel Jerry and Yankee Jake, who did know they were brothers, saw each other's lives in mutual misconception and mutual hate. There were a dozen dead Federals and guerrillas around the fire, and among them was Dawes Dillon, with the pallor of death on his face and the hate that life had written there still clinging to it. As Dan bent tenderly over his brother Harry, two soldiers brought in a huge body from the bushes, and he turned to see Rebel Jerry Dillon. There were half a dozen rents in his uniform, and a fearful slash under his chin, but he was breathing still. Chad Buford had escaped, and so had Yankee Jake. End of chapter 26.